My name is Andrea. I'm 28 years old, and I'm recording this from my hospital bed while breathing through an oxygen mask, because my own sister poisoned me with antifreeze. Right now, as I lie here paralyzed but fully conscious, I can see Melissa deliberately leaving my door open during the nurse's shift change, and I recognize that shadow approaching with a syringe. It's Derek, my ex-boyfriend, who's been helping her kill me for my inheritance. Before I continue this shocking story, please let me know where you're watching from today. If this story touches you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more incredible true stories. Now let me tell you exactly how my own flesh and blood tried to murder me, and the brilliant trap we set to catch them red-handed. Growing up, everyone always said Melissa was the golden child, and honestly, I believed it too. She was 3 years older than me, beautiful, charismatic, and could charm anyone within minutes of meeting them. Our parents absolutely adored her, and she seemed to excel at everything she touched. When I was struggling through college, Melissa was already running successful charity events and appearing in the local society pages. She was the sister everyone wished they had, or so I thought. Everything changed 2 years ago, when our parents died in what we thought was a tragic car accident on their way home from their anniversary dinner. The grief was unbearable, but Melissa stepped up immediately, handling all the funeral arrangements while I could barely function. She held me while I cried, promised we'd get through it together, that we were all each other had left. The inheritance was substantial, about $4 million split equally between us, plus the family home and their investment properties. Melissa suggested she handle the estate paperwork since she had more experience with financial matters, and I gratefully agreed, too lost in grief to care about money. 6 months after the funeral, I accidentally discovered the first crack in Melissa's perfect facade. I'd stopped by her condo unexpectedly to drop off some old photo albums I'd found, and caught her on the phone, screaming at someone about needing more time to pay. When she saw me, she quickly ended the call and plastered on that brilliant smile, but I'd already noticed the past due notices scattered across her kitchen counter. That night, I checked our parents' estate account and discovered $50,000 was missing. When I confronted Melissa, she broke down completely, sobbing about how she'd developed a gambling problem after a bad breakup, how she'd been trying to win back her losses, but kept digging deeper. She begged me not to involve lawyers, promised she'd get help and pay it all back. I should have listened to my instincts then, but she was my sister, my only family left. I agreed to keep it quiet if she attended Gamblers Anonymous and let me monitor the estate accounts. She seemed genuinely grateful, hugging me and crying about what a wonderful sister I was. For a few months, things seemed better. She showed me her GA attendance chips, introduced me to her sponsor, and slowly began repaying the money. I thought we'd weathered the storm. Then Derek entered the picture, or rather, re-entered it. Derek Patterson had been my boyfriend through college, and 2 years after. I'd thought he was the one, had even looked at engagement rings together, until I came home early from a business trip and found him in our bed with another woman. The breakup was messy and painful, and I'd spent months rebuilding my confidence. So when Melissa casually mentioned she'd run into Derek at a coffee shop, and he'd asked about me, every alarm bell in my head went off. She assured me she'd told him to leave me alone, that she knew how much he'd hurt me. The dinner party happened 3 weeks later. Melissa insisted on hosting a small gathering to celebrate my promotion at the marketing firm. She invited some mutual friends, prepared all my favorite foods, and seemed genuinely happy for my success. I remember her insisting on making her special sweet tea, the recipe our grandmother had passed down. She must have served me 3 glasses that night, playfully scolding me for not staying hydrated enough. The tea tasted sweeter than usual, but Melissa said she'd added honey for my throat since I'd been presenting all week. That night, I went to bed feeling slightly nauseous, which I attributed to overeating at the party. But the nausea didn't go away. Over the next few days, I developed crushing fatigue that made it hard to get out of bed. My vision would blur randomly during meetings, and I started getting severe abdominal cramps that left me doubled over in pain. When I mentioned it to Melissa, she immediately went into concerned sister mode, insisting on driving me to doctor appointments, holding my hand during blood draws, and researching my symptoms online. The first doctor ran basic tests and concluded I was suffering from stress and anxiety related to my promotion and grief over our parents. He prescribed anti-anxiety medication and suggested therapy. Melissa nodded along, mentioning to the doctor how hard I'd been working, how I never took breaks. I wanted to argue, but I was too exhausted and confused to advocate for myself. The medications didn't help. In fact, I felt worse, but Melissa was there every step of the way, bringing me home-cooked meals, helping with my laundry, and even calling my office to update them on my condition. Everyone kept telling me how lucky I was to have such a devoted sister. As my condition deteriorated over the following weeks, the pain in my kidneys became unbearable. I could barely keep food down, my breathing was labored, and I'd lost 20 pounds. Melissa moved into my apartment, claiming she needed to monitor me around the clock. She took over managing my bills, said I needed to focus on getting better. I was too weak to argue, spending most days curled up in bed, dependent on her for everything. She prepared all my meals, administered my medications, and fielded calls from concerned friends. The sweet taste became more noticeable in everything Melissa gave me. Not just the tea anymore, but in the soup she'd blend for me, the protein shakes she insisted I drink, even the water tasted oddly sweet. When I mentioned it, she'd laugh and say my taste buds were affected by the medications, that it was a common side effect. She'd sit beside my bed, stroking my hair like when we were children, telling me stories about our parents, how proud they'd be of how we were taking care of each other. My best friend Jade started noticing things I was too sick to see. She pointed out how Melissa would hover whenever she visited, never leaving us alone for long. How she'd insist on preparing any food or drinks Jade brought for me, claiming she needed to check for ingredients that might upset my stomach. Jade mentioned that Melissa seemed almost excited when discussing my symptoms with others, like she was enjoying the attention my illness brought her. I dismissed Jade's concerns as paranoia, but she wouldn't let it go. Without telling me, Jade installed a tiny camera in a stuffed bear she'd brought me, positioning it to capture the area where Melissa prepared my drinks. For 3 days, nothing unusual happened. Then, on the 4th day, while I was sleeping, the camera captured Melissa pulling a small bottle from her purse and carefully measuring drops of clear liquid into my tea. She stirred it thoroughly, even tasted it to check the sweetness, then brought it to me with her usual caring smile. Jade rushed to my apartment with the footage, and despite my weakness, insisted on taking me to the emergency room immediately. I could barely process what was happening as she showed the video to the ER doctors. They ran specific toxicology tests this time, and within hours, confirmed what Jade suspected. I had dangerous levels of ethylene glycol in my system. Antifreeze. My own sister had been slowly poisoning me with antifreeze, counting on its sweet taste and initial flu-like symptoms to go undetected. The police arrived within the hour, taking statements and securing the video evidence. When they went to question Melissa at my apartment, she performed beautifully. Tears streaming down her face, she claimed someone must have tampered with my food, that she'd never hurt me. She suggested maybe it was someone at my office, jealous of my promotion. When they told her about the video, she changed tactics, saying she'd been adding vitamin supplements to help me recover, that Jade must have misunderstood what she saw. As I lay in the ICU, receiving dialysis to clean the poison from my failing kidneys, Jade discovered more disturbing information. She'd been checking on my apartment when she noticed Derek leaving the building. When she confronted him, he claimed he'd been visiting a friend on another floor, but Jade saw him getting into Melissa's car. Following her instincts, Jade hired a private investigator, who uncovered that Derek and Melissa had been secretly involved for months, possibly even before my symptoms started. The investigation revealed something even more sinister. 2 months before I got sick, Melissa had taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on me, forging my signature on the documents. She'd listed herself as the sole beneficiary, paying the premiums from the money she'd stolen from our parents' estate. The policy would pay out double for accidental death, which apparently included death by poisoning if it couldn't be definitively traced to her. At the hospital, Melissa maintained her loving sister act. She posted daily updates on social media about my battle with a mysterious illness, sharing old photos of us as children, writing lengthy posts about the bond between sisters. The comments poured in, praising her dedication, offering prayers for my recovery. She'd sit in the waiting room, accepting hugs from our extended family, letting them comfort her through this difficult time. Our Aunt Margaret became her fiercest defender, telling anyone who'd listen that Melissa was a saint for taking care of me. When I tried to tell Margaret about the poisoning, about the evidence we had, she actually scolded me. She said the medications were making me paranoid, that I should be grateful to have a sister who loved me enough to put her life on hold. Other relatives echoed her sentiments, whispering about how the stress of losing our parents had clearly affected my mental health. Melissa had successfully painted herself as the victim, the devoted sister being unfairly accused by her mentally unstable sibling. My condition required intensive treatment. The antifreeze had severely damaged my kidneys, and I needed dialysis 3 times a week. The doctors explained that ethylene glycol poisoning was particularly insidious, because it metabolized into toxic compounds that destroyed organ tissue. They were amazed I'd survived as long as I had with the amount in my system. If Jade hadn't acted when she did, I would have been dead within days. The ICU became my prison and my sanctuary. While the dialysis slowly cleaned my blood, I remained vulnerable, hooked to machines that kept me alive. The doctors said I was improving, but recovery would be slow and complicated. My kidney function was severely compromised, and there was concern about long-term damage to my nervous system. Through it all, Melissa maintained her vigil, the devoted sister who never left my side. I started noticing patterns in the ICU. During the day, with full staff and plenty of witnesses, Melissa played her role perfectly. But during the evening shifts, when fewer people were around, her mask would slip. I overheard her on the phone one night, whispering urgently to someone she called Dee. She complained about how long this was taking, how the medical bills were eating into everything. She mentioned that certain substances were harder to obtain now that the hospital was monitoring everything so closely. When she noticed my eyes were open, she quickly switched to talking about updating my co-workers, but I'd heard enough to know Dee was Derek. Nurse Catherine became my guardian angel during those vulnerable weeks. A 20-year veteran of the ICU, she had instincts honed by decades of experience. She noticed how Melissa always volunteered to help with my care, particularly interested in my 4 medications. How she'd question every decision, wanting to know exactly what was being administered and when. Catherine started documenting these observations, sharing her concerns with the charge nurse and security. The security guard situation was more complicated. Bruno worked the night shift, a middle-aged man struggling with gambling debts of his own. Melissa somehow discovered his vulnerability and exploited it. I watched her slip him an envelope one evening, saw him palm it quickly before resuming his rounds. After that, Bruno's vigilance noticeably decreased during Melissa's visits. He'd take longer breaks, patrol different areas when she arrived, and occasionally disable certain cameras for maintenance. The night everything escalated still haunts me. It was during the 11 p.m. shift change, that chaotic window when nurses were updating charts and passing along patient information. Melissa had been especially attentive that evening, fluffing my pillows, adjusting my blankets, acting like the perfect caregiver. As the nurses gathered at their station for report, she stepped out, claiming she needed to call our aunt with an update. But she left my door slightly ajar, something strictly forbidden in the ICU for infection control. Through my medicated haze, I saw a figure approach my door. Even before he entered, I recognized Derek's silhouette, the way he carried himself with that casual arrogance I once found attractive. He slipped inside wearing scrubs he must have stolen, looking every bit like he belonged there. In his hand was a syringe filled with clear liquid. He moved toward my forepaw with practiced efficiency, and I realized this wasn't his first time sneaking into a hospital room. My body betrayed me completely. The residual effects of the antifreeze poisoning combined with the heavy medications left me paralyzed. I tried to reach for the call button, willing my arm to move just inches, but it remained uselessly at my side. I couldn't even scream, my throat dry and constricted from the breathing tube they'd removed just days before. All I could do was watch as Derek approached with that syringe, his face showing no emotion, like I was just another task to complete. Jade saved my life for the second time. She'd been suspicious of the shift change timing and had hidden in the bathroom to watch what Melissa would do. When she saw Derek enter my room, she used her phone to photograph him with the syringe before bursting in, screaming for security. Derek fled immediately, shoving past a confused Bruno, who seemed conveniently slow to respond. By the time real security arrived, Derek had vanished, likely out a predetermined exit route. The aftermath was frustrating beyond belief. When administrators reviewed the security footage, critical segments were corrupted or missing. The camera covering my door showed nothing but static during the crucial minutes. Other cameras that should have captured Derek's entrance and exit had mysteriously malfunctioned. Without the footage, Jade's photographs were the only evidence, and Derek's lawyer quickly claimed they were taken out of context, that his client had never been in the hospital that night. Melissa's performance when questioned was Oscar-worthy. She appeared genuinely shocked and confused, clinging to Aunt Margaret, while insisting she'd only stepped out to make a phone call. She produced her call log, showing a 12-minute conversation with Margaret during the incident. When asked about the door, she became tearful, saying she must have forgotten in her exhaustion that she'd been running on no sleep for weeks caring for me. Several nurses confirmed she'd been a constant presence, always concerned about my care. Margaret became Melissa's fiercest advocate, practically attacking anyone who questioned her story. She told the police I'd been showing signs of paranoia for weeks, that the poisoning had affected my mind. She suggested that maybe I was having hallucinations, seeing danger where none existed. When Jade tried to show her the photographs of Derek, Margaret dismissed them as unclear, saying it could have been anyone in scrubs. The family rallied around Melissa, praising her dedication while questioning my mental state. The police were sympathetic, but explained their hands were tied. Without clear evidence placing Derek in my room, without the security footage, they couldn't arrest him for attempted murder. The photographs showed someone who looked like Derek, but his lawyer argued reasonable doubt. The syringe had never been recovered, and no one else had witnessed him in the hospital. They increased security on my room, but said that was all they could do without more proof. That night, after everyone left, I lay awake despite the sedatives, my mind racing. Melissa had almost succeeded twice now, and she was getting bolder. The failed attempt hadn't discouraged her, it had only shown her she needed to be more careful. I realized then that playing defense wasn't enough. If I wanted to survive, If I wanted justice for what she'd done to me and possibly to our parents, I needed to go on the offensive. I needed to make her believe she was winning while setting a trap she couldn't escape. The plan formed slowly in my mind as I recovered enough to think clearly. If Melissa wanted me dead badly enough to risk everything, I'd give her exactly what she wanted, or at least make her think I would. Working with Jade and Catherine, who'd become fully invested in keeping me alive, we developed a strategy that required patience, acting skills, and nerves of steel. We would let Melissa believe my condition was deteriorating while secretly documenting every move she made. Catherine proved instrumental in executing our plan. She arranged for specific doctors to be on my case, ones who understood the situation and would help sell the deception. They began issuing carefully worded updates about my declining kidney function, how the damage might be irreversible, how my body was struggling to recover. The medical reports were technically accurate, but presented in the most dire way possible. Melissa absorbed every word, and I could see the anticipation building behind her concerned expression. We needed more allies, and surprisingly, my cousin Tony became one of them. He'd always been the black sheep of the family, a former Marine who'd become a private security contractor. While the rest of the family fawned over Melissa, Tony watched from the sidelines with suspicion. He approached me one evening when Melissa was at one of her GA meetings, telling me his military experience had taught him to recognize predators, and Melissa had the eyes of someone capable of anything. He offered to help however he could. Under Tony's guidance, we installed sophisticated recording equipment in my hospital room. Tiny cameras that looked like screws in the medical equipment, audio recorders that appeared to be part of the normal monitoring devices. Everything uploaded to a secure cloud server that Melissa couldn't access even if she discovered the hardware. We also began documenting everything, creating a paper trail that would be undeniable when the time came to use it. The deception required me to be a better actress than I'd ever imagined possible. When Melissa visited, I made my breathing more labored, my responses slower. I'd close my eyes for longer periods, pretend to struggle with simple words. Catherine would shake her head sadly when updating Melissa on my condition, mentioning new complications that arose daily. We watched Melissa try to hide her excitement, saw her calculating how much longer she'd have to wait. As part of the plan, we made Melissa feel secure enough to be careless. Tony pretended to side with Aunt Margaret, publicly questioning my mental state and suggesting Melissa deserved support, not suspicion. This earned him access to Melissa's inner circle, where he learned disturbing details about her desperation. She owed nearly $500,000 to various creditors, including some very dangerous people, who didn't accept bankruptcy as an excuse for non-payment. During one of my fake comas, with Melissa believing I was completely unconscious, she brought Derek to visit. They spoke freely, discussing their plans for my inheritance. Derek revealed he'd done this before with an elderly woman in Phoenix, making her death look like natural causes, while he inherited everything as her devoted caregiver. He coached Melissa on patience, on playing the long game, but she insisted they needed to speed things up. The people she owed were getting impatient, making threats she couldn't ignore. The recordings revealed something that chilled me to my core. Melissa casually mentioned how easy it had been with our parents, how a small cut in the brake line had looked like wear and tear to investigators. She laughed about how she'd suggested that anniversary dinner, knowing they'd take the mountain road home. Derek praised her initiative, but warned that using the same method twice would raise suspicions. They needed my death to appear completely natural, a tragic, but inevitable result of the poisoning damage. During another recorded conversation, Melissa practiced forging my signature on various documents, with Derek guiding her technique. They discussed liquidating my assets quickly after my death, which countries didn't have extradition treaties with the United States, and how they'd maintain appearances until they could safely disappear. Melissa mentioned she'd already been in touch with a realtor about selling my apartment, claiming she was preparing for the worst on my behalf. One night, Melissa attempted to increase my morphine drip while the nurse was dealing with another patient's emergency. She'd watched enough to know how to override the pump's safety mechanisms, planning to give me a fatal dose that would look like an unfortunate medical error. But Catherine had anticipated this, switching my 4-bag with a harmless saline solution before her shift ended. We filmed everything, Melissa's careful manipulation of the pump, her satisfied smile, as she watched the increased dose flow into my 4. Our break came when Ray Chen, a former colleague who'd joined the FBI, reached out after hearing about my condition through mutual friends. Though he couldn't officially investigate, he was willing to review our evidence and provide guidance. What he saw convinced him we were dealing with sophisticated criminals who'd likely killed before. He helped us understand what evidence would be needed for federal charges, particularly regarding the insurance fraud and attempted murder across state lines. Ray's unofficial investigation uncovered Derek's history of targeting wealthy women. Using facial recognition and database searches, he found 3 other cases remarkably similar to mine over the past decade. Women who'd died from various illnesses after changing their wills or insurance policies. Derek had used different names, but the pattern was unmistakable. He was a serial killer who used charm instead of violence, poison instead of bullets. The revelation about our parents hit me hardest. Ray found that Melissa had searched online for how to cause brake failure just weeks before their accident. She'd visited our parents the day before their anniversary, had access to their garage where the car was kept. The brake line failure had been attributed to age and wear, but photos from the investigation showed tool marks that were overlooked at the time. My sister hadn't just tried to kill me, she'd murdered our parents for money she'd already gambled away. By now, Melissa was growing frustrated with my continued survival. The medical team kept reporting that I was declining but somehow hanging on. She started researching more aggressive poisons, ones that would be harder to detect. Our surveillance caught her on the phone with someone discussing procurement of something called succinylcholine, a paralytic drug that could cause respiratory failure. She was done waiting for me to die naturally from kidney failure. Everything came together on a cold Thursday evening. The medical team had spent the week preparing Melissa for my imminent death, with doctors speaking in hushed tones about organ failure and last-ditch efforts. Melissa could barely contain her anticipation, already making preliminary funeral arrangements and contacting lawyers about the estate. She'd even bought a black dress, which she kept in her car, ready for her grieving sister performance. Tony and Ray had coordinated with local police and FBI agents who'd been building a case based on our evidence. They needed Melissa and Derek to make one more attempt, something undeniable that would connect all the pieces. We gave them the perfect opportunity by having the doctors announce that I'd likely not survive the night, that family should say their goodbyes. Melissa called Derek immediately, and our surveillance recorded her saying it was finally time to finish this. The hospital administrator, now fully aware of the situation, arranged for a skeleton crew in the ICU that night. Most were undercover officers posing as medical staff, while the real nurses were kept safe in another wing. They'd even found Curtis, a security guard, who looked enough like Bruno to fool Melissa in the dim lighting. The stage was set for the final act of our deadly play. Melissa arrived at 8 p.m. with flowers and tissues, ready to play the grieving sister. She stationed herself by my bed, holding my hand while tears rolled down her cheeks. To anyone watching, she was the picture of devotion. But the cameras caught her repeatedly checking her phone, watching the clock, and glancing toward the door. At 10:30, she made her move, approaching the fake Bruno with an envelope thick with cash. Just after 11, as the fake shift change began, Derek arrived wearing stolen scrubs and a surgical mask. Melissa had done her part, leaving the door ajar and ensuring the hallway appeared empty. Derek moved confidently, clearly following a rehearsed plan. This time he carried 2 syringes, one with potassium chloride to stop my heart, another with succinylcholine to ensure I couldn't fight back. He believed I was already comatose, heavily sedated and unaware. As Derek approached my bed, I kept my eyes closed, controlling my breathing to appear unconscious. Through slitted eyelids, I watched him prepare the first syringe, tapping it to remove air bubbles with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this before. He reached for my foreport, and I could hear Melissa in the hallway, keeping watch. They were seconds away from succeeding when the trap finally sprang. The room flooded with light as FBI agents and police officers burst through every entrance. Derek's hand froze inches from my fore as officers surrounded him, weapons drawn. The shock on his face was almost comical as he realized the nurses, the security guard, even some of the patients were all law enforcement. Melissa tried to run, but found Tony blocking her exit, his military training making him an immovable wall. The violence erupted when Derek made a desperate lunge toward me with the syringe. He managed to grab my arm before Tony tackled him, the needle missing my skin by millimeters. They crashed into medical equipment, Derek fighting with the fury of a cornered animal. It took 3 officers to subdue him, and even then he continued struggling, screaming that we'd set him up, that he was innocent, that the syringes were just vitamins. Melissa's reaction was pure rage. As they handcuffed her, she turned on Derek, screaming that this was his fault, that he'd ruined everything with his sloppiness. She tried to destroy evidence, throwing her phone against the wall and attempting to grab the recording equipment she'd finally noticed. Ray intercepted her, professionally restraining her while she spat venomous threats at everyone, especially me. When the chaos settled, I finally opened my eyes fully and spoke the words I'd been rehearsing for days. Looking directly at Melissa, I said clearly, I heard everything. Every single word. The realization that I'd been conscious for all her confessions, all her planning sessions with Derek, hit her like a physical blow. Her face went white, then red, then she launched into a tirade that included a full confession, unable to stop herself from revealing every detail in her fury. She admitted to killing our parents, to slowly poisoning me, to planning my final murder. She screamed about how I'd always been the favorite, how I didn't deserve the inheritance, how she was smarter and prettier and more deserving. She revealed details only the killer would know, like putting antifreeze in the windshield wiper fluid so our parents would use it on the mountain road, creating invisible fumes that would disorient Dad just enough to miss the curve. Derek's arrest revealed the full scope of his crimes. In his apartment, investigators found detailed records of his previous victims, including photos, forged documents, and even trophies he'd kept. He'd murdered at least 5 women over 12 years, perfecting his technique with each kill. Melissa was both his partner and his latest mark, as evidence suggested he planned to eventually kill her too once he had access to all the money. The story exploded across local and national media within hours. Sister's deadly betrayal became the headline that followed me everywhere, with reporters camping outside the hospital, desperate for interviews. The narrative was irresistible to them, the devoted sister, who turned out to be a calculating killer, the victim who outsmarted her would-be murderers from her hospital bed. Every detail of our family's tragedy was dissected on cable news shows and true crime podcasts. Melissa's legal team immediately went on the offensive, claiming I'd orchestrated an elaborate frame job. Her lawyer, a slick defender known for taking hopeless cases, argued that I'd poisoned myself for attention, then manipulated evidence to implicate my innocent sister. He suggested the recordings were doctored, that Derek was a patsy I'd hired, that my mental state made me an unreliable witness. The strategy might have worked if we hadn't been so thorough in our documentation. Derek, facing multiple murder charges across several states, made a calculated decision to turn state's evidence. In exchange for life in prison instead of the death penalty, he provided detailed testimony about their entire conspiracy. He revealed how Melissa had approached him at a casino, recognizing him from articles about his elderly victim in Phoenix. She'd propositioned him with a partnership, offering her knowledge of my routines and habits in exchange for his expertise in untraceable killing methods. The trial preparation was exhausting. Still recovering from kidney damage, I had to relive every moment of betrayal, every instance of poisoning, every manipulative word my sister had spoken. The prosecutors prepared me for Melissa's defense team's attacks on my credibility, warning that they'd paint me as a vengeful sister jealous of Melissa's charm and social success. They would claim the antifreeze poisoning was self-inflicted, a cry for attention that spiraled out of control. During depositions, evidence emerged that stunned even the prosecutors. Melissa had been planning this for years, long before our parents' death. She'd taken out life insurance policies on them too, smaller amounts that wouldn't raise suspicions. She'd researched inheritance law, poison detection, and police investigation procedures. Her browser history revealed searches about kidney failure, dialysis complications, and how long someone could survive with damaged organs. The physical evidence was overwhelming. Police found antifreeze containers hidden in Melissa's apartment, along with the vitamin bottles she'd used to disguise the poison. They discovered she'd purchased the brake line cutting tool with cash, but kept the receipt, a trophy of her first successful murder. Her financial records showed the massive gambling debts that drove her desperation, including loans from people connected to organized crime who'd threatened her life if she didn't pay. Our extended family's reaction was mixed and painful. Aunt Margaret initially refused to believe the evidence, clinging to the image of the devoted niece she thought she knew. But as detail after detail emerged during pre-trial hearings, even she couldn't deny the truth. The family split into factions, some supporting me while others insisted there had to be some explanation, some reason why Melissa had snapped that made this my fault somehow. The trial itself was a media circus. Every day, crowds gathered outside the courthouse, some supporting Melissa with signs proclaiming her innocence, others calling for justice for our parents. I testified via closed-circuit video, still too weak to spend long periods in the courtroom. Watching Melissa in her defendant's chair, wearing conservative clothes chosen by her lawyers to make her look innocent, I struggled to reconcile this monster with the sister who'd taught me to ride a bicycle. Melissa's breakdown came during my testimony. As I detailed finding out about our parents' murder, she suddenly stood and screamed that they'd loved me more, that everything had always been about Andrea, that she deserved that money more than anyone. Her lawyers tried to silence her, but the dam had broken. She ranted about the unfairness of life, how gambling was a disease she couldn't control, how I should have just died quietly instead of fighting back. The jury watched in shock, as she revealed her true self. The verdict was swift and decisive. Guilty on all counts, including 2 counts of first-degree murder for our parents, attempted murder for me, conspiracy, fraud, and multiple other charges. The judge sentenced her to life without parole, calling her crimes particularly heinous betrayal of family trust. Derek received 25 to life as part of his plea deal, with charges still pending in other states. As they led Melissa away, she turned to me one last time, her eyes filled with hatred that would haunt my dreams. The aftermath of the trial brought unexpected challenges. I had to sell our family home, unable to live with memories of parents who'd never see justice, and a sister who'd destroyed everything for money. Going through their belongings, I found letters Mom had written to both of us for future milestones, weddings, grandchildren, moments that would never come. I discovered Dad's journal where he'd worried about Melissa's spending, but loved her too much to confront her seriously. Support came from unexpected sources. Other victims of family violence reached out, sharing their stories of survival and recovery. A woman whose brother had tried to kill her for inheritance money became a close friend, understanding the unique pain of family betrayal. These connections showed me I wasn't alone in experiencing the unthinkable, that others had survived and even thrived after similar traumas. During this time, I underwent a kidney transplant, with Jade volunteering as a donor. Her selfless act, risking her own health to save mine after everything I'd been through, represented the opposite of Melissa's betrayal. The surgery was successful, though recovery was slow and difficult. As my body healed, I worked on healing my mind too, understanding that physical recovery was only part of the journey. 6 months after the trial, I finally felt strong enough to begin rebuilding my life. Physical therapy helped me regain strength stolen by months of poisoning and bed rest. Each small victory, walking without assistance, climbing stairs without gasping, preparing my own meals, felt monumental. My body bore permanent scars from the ordeal, but I was alive when Melissa had done everything possible to ensure I wouldn't be. The decision to start a foundation came naturally. Using part of my inheritance, I established a support network for victims of family violence, particularly those who'd survived poisoning attempts or financial exploitation by relatives. The foundation provided resources for medical testing, legal assistance, and therapy. We created educational materials about recognizing signs of familial abuse, understanding that predators often hide behind masks of love and concern. Speaking at survivor conferences terrified me initially. Standing before audiences and revealing such personal trauma felt like ripping open wounds repeatedly. But every time someone approached afterward, tears in their eyes, saying my story helped them recognize their own danger or validate their suspicions about a family member, I knew this was my purpose. The pain transformed into power when it helped others escape similar fates. My relationship with Jade evolved into something deeper than friendship. She'd saved my life multiple times, stood by me when my own blood tried to kill me, and literally gave me part of herself, so I could survive. The transition from best friend to partner felt natural, built on a foundation of absolute trust. She understood my struggles with trusting anyone after Melissa's betrayal and patiently helped me learn that accepting love didn't mean risking destruction. Therapy became essential to my recovery. Dr. Sarah Martinez specialized in betrayal trauma, helping me understand that my guilt over surviving when my parents hadn't wasn't rational, but was entirely normal. We worked through the complicated grief of losing my sister twice, once to her choices and again to justice. I learned that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing actions, but rather releasing the poison of hatred that threatened to consume me. 1 year after the trial, I received a letter from Melissa in prison. Her handwriting was still perfectly neat, but the words were venomous. She blamed me for ruining her life, claimed I'd driven her to desperation by being the favored child, insisted our parents' death was partly my fault for not sharing my inheritance sooner. She demanded I put money in her commissary account, saying I owed her that much. I read it once, then gave it to my lawyer to file with the others she'd sent. The decision to forgive Melissa wasn't made lightly or quickly. It came during a quiet moment at our parents' graves, where I regularly brought fresh flowers and updates about my life. I realized that carrying hatred for her was like continuing to drink the poison she'd fed me. Forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation or forgetting her crimes. It meant choosing to release the anger that gave her continued power over my life, choosing peace over perpetual rage. My new career as a patient advocate grew from personal experience. Hospitals hired me to train staff in recognizing signs of family-perpetrated medical abuse. I developed protocols for protecting vulnerable patients from relatives who might harm them, ensuring no one else would lie helpless while a sibling tried to murder them. The work felt like honoring not just my survival, but my parents' memory, creating something positive from unspeakable tragedy. Catherine and I maintained a close friendship after everything ended. She'd risked her career to protect me, going beyond professional duty to ensure my survival. We met monthly for coffee, and she shared stories of other patients she'd helped using protocols we'd developed together. Knowing that our traumatic experience led to systemic changes that protected others gave meaning to the suffering. A moment of profound vindication came when I helped identify another poisoning victim. A young man contacted the foundation, describing how his stepmother's special smoothies made him increasingly ill. The symptoms matched my experience perfectly: that telltale sweetness, the gradual organ failure, the devoted caretaker act. Working with law enforcement, we got him tested in time. He survived because he recognized the signs from my story, and his stepmother was arrested before she could finish what she'd started. Through all of this, Tony remained a protective presence in my life. My cousin became the brother I'd never had, checking in regularly and teaching me self-defense techniques that helped me feel less vulnerable. He introduced me to other survivors from his military career, people who'd faced betrayal in different contexts, but understood the shattering of fundamental trust. Their resilience inspired my own recovery journey. The financial aspects required careful handling. I liquidated most assets tied to painful memories, selling properties and possessions that reminded me of my former life. The money funded the foundation and my education in patient advocacy. I kept only a few meaningful items, photos of happy times before everything went wrong, jewelry my mother wore, books my father loved. These tangible connections to the parents I'd lost felt important to preserve. My story became a cautionary tale in true crime circles, analyzed in documentaries and podcasts. While the attention sometimes felt invasive, I participated selectively, always emphasizing the warning signs people missed and the importance of trusting instincts. If sharing my trauma prevented even one person from suffering similarly, the discomfort was worthwhile. The story belonged to more than just me now. It belonged to everyone who needed to hear it. 5 years later, I stood before another audience, this time at a medical conference about family-perpetrated poisonings. Looking at the faces of healthcare providers eager to learn, I felt the full weight of transformation. From victim to survivor to advocate, each stage had demanded more than I thought possible to give. But as I began speaking, sharing the clinical details that might help them save someone else, I knew this was exactly where I belonged. My closing words to every audience remain the same. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even when that person shares your blood, your history, your parents. Love shouldn't taste sweet when it's slowly killing you. Family shouldn't require you to die for their survival. And when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time, because the second time might be too late. Most importantly, remember that surviving isn't just about living through trauma, it's about transforming that pain into purpose, ensuring that what happened to you becomes a warning that saves others. The poison my sister fed me nearly killed my body, but the antidote I found in helping others saved my soul. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? What warning signs do you wish you'd recognized sooner? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you or might help someone you know recognize danger, please like this video and share it with others. Subscribe to hear more survival stories that could save lives, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening to my journey from victim to survivor. Remember, you're stronger than you know, and your instincts are there to protect you. Stay safe, trust yourself, and never apologize for choosing your survival over someone else's comfort.